Thank you, Madam Secretary, for your testimony. The chair will now recognize members for 5 minutes of questions, and I will recognize myself to begin the questionings. Madam Secretary, less than 2 weeks ago, BLM issued the final supplemental environmental impact statement for the Ambler Road Access Project, a right-of-way application to construct a 211-mile road in the Ambler Mining District of Alaska. Just 25 miles of this 211-mile road would cross the BLM land. Unfortunately, BLM took an unprecedented step in issuing the no-action alternative, effectively killing access to huge deposits of minerals. Secretary Haaland, do you know what minerals this project seeks to access?
Chairman, thank you so much for the question, and I just want to... Thank you. Sorry about that. I guess I'm losing my touch, Chairman. I had to remember to press talk. I want to just state in the beginning that Ambler Road is not a decision yet. And I want to say that the analysis release concerns the 210-mile road construction proposal, and no related mine proposals are pending. So if we get a related mine proposal, of course, then we will see what the proposal states and how we move forward on it.
Do you know what minerals are at that mine?
Congressman, there is no mine. There was no mine there.
Mine.
So there's no mine. So
it's 265.5 million tons of mineral ore that includes copper, zinc, gold, silver, cobalt, lead, and germanium, all very critical to our economy. So let's take copper for an example. According to the USGS, the U.S. is currently 46% net reliant on foreign sources of copper, and global copper demand is already starting to skyrocket. Since the Biden administration shut down the potential access to 30% of U.S. copper reserves with its land withdrawal in northern Minnesota, and now yet we're looking at more in Alaska, where does the Biden administration support new copper production, and what is in the proposed budget to make that happen?
Chairman, thank you for the question. And first, I will say that since President Biden has been in office since January 2021, we have approved 40 mining or mining modification permits since the president has been in office. That includes 5 critical mineral mines.
But these aren't new mines. And back to the original question, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? How do you build a mine without having a road to get to the mine? But these elements of copper, nickel, and cobalt are critical to the Biden administration's very own mineral-heavy renewable energy goals. Your testimony mentioned budgeting for supply chains. How are you specifically working to ensure that expedited production on federal lands is there to meet the rising demand of these minerals?
Thank you very much for the question, Chairman. And first, I will say that our interagency work group on mining reform has taken this issue very seriously. We have a mining law that's 150 years old that doesn't meet the needs of our world today in 2024. So we're proud of the report that we were able to put out, and we're moving forward.
Madam Secretary, I've got to move on. A report is not an action to make sure that we're securing these critical minerals. Moving to a different topic, since the migrant camp opened at Floyd Bennett Field last year, nearly every issue that we predicted has come to light. This includes reports of increased crime and drug use in the neighboring communities. Local residents have reported increased instances of shoplifting, panhandling, and street prostitution since the camp opened. There have been multiple arrests at the facility for assault and domestic violence, and all of this is happening while New Yorkers are having to bear the brunt of classes being canceled at school and community programs that are no longer safe for kids to attend. Do you agree that it's wrong to deny New Yorkers access to their public lands? And this is one of the only green spaces they have for these indefinite encampments for migrants.
Thank you so much for the question, Chairman. And I understand that this is a lease between the National Park Service and the City of New York. I know that
Do you agree this lease sets a new precedent?
We enter leases all the time. The National Park Service enter leases all the time
Can you
with various entities.
Can you assure the committee that no other national park sites will be used to house migrants?
It's my understanding that there are no other issues of this kind or proposed leases
Can you assure the committee that no further migrants will be bused to Floyd Bennett Field?
I can't answer to how various states move migrants across the country, Chairman, but the National Park Service apparently has had the conversations necessary. And I want to assure you that we have a very robust solicitor's office who takes very seriously and advises us on these issues and overlooks our contracts. We don't do this very lightly. It's all very serious process, and we take it very seriously.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. My time has expired. I recognize Mr. Levin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Haaland, it's wonderful to see you. We miss you here on the Natural Resources Committee. Really glad you're here to discuss the department's work and the importance of providing sustained funding for you to continue your many critical initiatives that help protect our public lands, promote domestic clean energy production, and provide outdoor recreation opportunities. The department has clearly been very busy over the last few weeks, and we're grateful to hear your announcements and see final rules that are promoting renewable energy development on public lands, holding oil and gas companies accountable, and recognizing the vital role that conservation has in public lands management. I'm glad that you and the Biden administration are advancing historic action on climate change, commensurate with what this moment in history demands. I was pleased in particular to hear that we're already surpassing the goal Congress set in the Energy Act of 2020 to permit 25 gigawatts of renewable energy on public lands by 2025, with DOI already successfully permitting 29 gigawatts ahead of schedule. As you know, the Public Lands Renewable Energy Development Act, or PLREDA, which has long been bipartisan legislation I'm proud to champion, promotes the responsible development of wind, solar, and geothermal resources on federal land. It's endorsed by both industry and conservation organizations. I see this bill as working in conjunction with DOI's recently finalized renewable energy rule and the ongoing Western Solar PEIS process. The bill includes revenue sharing for states, communities, and a conservation fund and incentivizes development in low-conflict priority areas. It will ultimately help ensure we can meet our dual climate goals of 1, enhancing renewable energy permitting and deployment, and 2, conserving our nation's treasured natural and cultural resources. So, Secretary, can you tell me more about how the administration is working to facilitate environmentally responsible renewable energy development on federal lands?
Thank you so much, Congressman, and thank you for your welcome here. It's always wonderful to be back in your company. Yes, we are. I'm very proud of the fact that we have met this goal ahead of schedule. Thank you for recognizing that. I just returned from Arizona, where we essentially cut a ribbon on the 10 West transmission line that will carry energy across state line, so into your state as well. The 500 kilovolt line, it was possible because of our early outreach and engagement. And I want to emphasize the great work of Interior staff, specifically for this project, the BLM, who knows the communities very well and engages with them early. And I think that is the key to ensuring that we can move more of these projects forward.
Can you, along those lines, compare the projects that have successfully gone through the permitting process with those that may have struggled due to community opposition? And specifically, can you speak to any correlation between how actively project sponsors engage with interested or impacted communities early on or prior to the permitting process and positive project outcomes, or how a lack of stakeholder engagement might create project delays or even cancellations?
Thank you very much, Congressman. And as I mentioned, the early outreach allows for more informed participation from tribes and stakeholders. Public buy-in also increases public confidence in these projects and reduces the risk of costly and time-consuming litigation. And I'd like to point out that for renewable energy projects, our recently finalized rule ensures there is an initial in-person meeting with the public, because we and the public have seen the improvements and outcomes from early engagement. So I really believe that is the key, and we'll follow that and move forward.
Thank you for that. Another major announcement that came out was the final oil and gas rule, which set fair royalty and bonding rates for oil and gas operators on public lands for the first time in decades, and implemented reforms Congress enacted in the Inflation Reduction Act, including some that my colleagues and I on this committee have championed. The final rule will hold oil and gas companies accountable for their impacts on public lands and provide a fair return for taxpayers. We sometimes hear that the bonding reforms are unwarranted. I've heard the claim there are only 37 documented orphan wells on BLM land. Can you take a moment to tell us why this may be a misrepresentation of the issue?
Thank you, Congressman. I first want to point out that the rule reflects provisions in the Inflation Reduction Act pertaining to increased royalty rates, rentals, minimum bids, and expressions of interest. The increase in bonding helps keep taxpayers from being on the hook. I've traveled around the country and to lift up the work that we're doing on orphan gas wells and abandoned mine lands, and it's pretty clear that taxpayers foot the bill on so many of these things. We want to make sure that companies have the wherewithal to clean up after themselves. So this rule updates oil and gas bonding requirements for the first time in 60 years to ensure reclamation costs are not borne by the American public.
Thanks, Secretary. I'm out of time. Yield back.
Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to submit into the record a recent New York Times article showing that, contrary to Republicans' anecdote-driven claims that migrants entering the United States are causing a surge in violent crimes, according to police data, there's been no surge of violence and crime since April 2022, which is when Governor Greg Abbott started using migrants as a political tool by putting them on buses and dropping them off in cities like New York. This is New York Times, February 2024.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, time's expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Wyoming, the chair of the Subcommittee on Indian and Insular Affairs, Ms. Hageman. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here, but you don't need to thank me for my questions when I ask them. Secretary Haaland, as you may already know, this committee recently held a hearing during which tribal members spoke openly about their fear, as well as others, of testifying in front of Congress due to retaliation from criminal drug cartels that have been openly targeting Indian lands, such as the Sonola and Jalisco New Generation, among others. These cartels have run rampant across Indian country, particularly in the northwestern region of the United States, and are enabled by the lack of enforcement of the border laws by the Biden administration. As a member of a federally recognized tribe, I would assume that you care about ensuring that our tribal communities are safe. Yes or no, have you spoken to President Biden or Secretary Mayorkas about the damaging impacts the administration's border policy has had on tribal communities?
Congresswoman, I have not. However, I want you to know that I have traveled around to tribes.
Okay, but you haven't spoken to either President Biden or Mayorkas about the need to close the border in order to protect our tribal communities. Is that right?
I have not.
Is that correct? All right. Yes or no, do you believe that due to the unique nature of law enforcement operating in Indian country, is it fair to say that coordination with other agencies is crucial to tackling human and drug trafficking in Indian country?
Congresswoman, the president, when he first came to office...
Have you done anything to work with other agencies to tackle the human and drug trafficking in Indian country related to the border crisis?
Since the president has been in office, Congresswoman...
That is a yes or no question. Would you please answer my question?
Mr. Chairman, can you let the Secretary answer the question?
She's not answering my question.
Congresswoman, since the president has been in office, he has restarted the White House Council on Native American Affairs. These are issues that we discuss. We take an intergovernmental approach to all of Indian country.
What have you done specifically to work with Mayorkas to close the border in order to protect our tribal communities from the cartel criminal activity?
Congresswoman, that is not in the department's mission. We manage our public lands,
so
and
I take it that means you've done nothing.
And treaty obligations of our nation's Indian
You have not
tribes.
done anything to work with Mr. Mayorkas, is that correct?
No, ma'am.
Okay. During your time as Secretary, what have you done specifically to work with our tribes to reduce and eliminate criminal cartels from targeting Indian country?
Congresswoman, I want you to know that tribes have been underfunded for decades and decades with respect to law enforcement and justice services. And
So
that is
have
one
you done
area where
anything
we are
specific?
working.
Have you done anything specifically to work with our tribes to address the drug trafficking and human smuggling that is going on related to the open border?
We are working very hard to make sure that Indian Affairs has several approaches to addressing recruitment and retention. We understand that they are understaffed in many of these areas, and we listen to tribes and how they would like us to move this issue
Madam
forward
Secretary,
for them.
what have you done as a cabinet-level secretary to convince Mr. Biden and Mayorkas to close the border in order to protect our tribal communities?
Congresswoman, it is my job to manage our public lands. The Department of the Interior manages our public lands and conserves our cultural heritage and natural resources for the American people, as well as upholding the trust and treaty responsibilities of our
But the Bureau of
Indian
Indian
tribes.
Affairs is within the Department of Interior, correct?
Yes, ma'am. But
Okay. In 2018, under the previous administration, more than 3,200 pounds of illegal narcotics, estimated to be valued at $9.8 million, had been seized by the Office of Justice Services. How much did OJS seize in 2023?
Congresswoman, that would be up to the Department of Justice, and they can probably inform you with the number of those pounds.
But you don't know?
I do not know.
Okay. Does DOI's Opioid Reduction Task Force still exist?
Congresswoman, thank you. We are working hard with tribes to ensure that we manage their justice services the way that they want
So
to.
the question was, does the Department of Interior's Opioid Reduction Task Force still exist?
Congresswoman, I would be happy to answer that for the record.
Is the answer yes or no?
I will be happy to answer that for the record.
You don't know as you sit here today?
I want to make sure that I give you the correct answer, and I will do that when I get back to my office.
Have you heard of the Rock Springs Resource Management Plan?
No, I have not.
Thank you. I'm out of time. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Nevada, Ms. Lee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here, Secretary Haaland. I wanted to also thank you on behalf of Native American tribes in Nevada for your leadership in designating Aviquame as the nation's latest national monument. Not only that, the Department of Interior has also been actively uplifting Nevadans in other ways since that time, including finalizing an agreement with the Department of Housing and Urban Development to make eligible public lands available for $100 an acre, far below fair market value, for the sole purpose of constructing critically needed affordable housing projects in southern Nevada. Can you update us on Interior's efforts to support affordable housing for Nevadans, including through this agreement?
Congresswoman, thank you so much for the question and for recognizing that this is truly an issue across the country. We want to get great folks working on our public lands, and we can only do that if they have a place to live. The BLM is currently working on 2 additional conveyances for affordable housing under this MOU. One of the proposals is from Clark County, and we're working to complete that conveyance by early next year. The other proposal is from the city of Henderson, which is at an earlier stage. So we're seeing great progress and potential under this MOU, and we'll continue working with HUD and the state and local communities on this critical issue, and be happy to keep you updated on it as we move forward.
Great, thank you. Just also happy to report that facility in my district with 195 units of affordable housing specifically for seniors is on its way, so thank you for that. Also, I appreciate Interior's testimony in support of my bipartisan ACE Act, which is another tool that will give the department additional flexibility to get land deals done more quickly for housing, conservation, and other critical infrastructure. Secretary Haaland, I want to switch to staffing. The BLM administers 50 million acres of land in my state alone. Yet we know that after the Trump administration announced the plans to relocate BLM headquarters to Colorado, more than 87% of BLM's Washington-based employees left the agency. And upon her confirmation, BLM Director Tracy Stone Manning emphasized that her top priority was rebuilding the agency and fixing staff shortages. Last year in this committee, you acknowledged this issue and the impacts it has on Western communities like my own. Officials in my home of Clark County, for instance, have indicated that it can still take up to 2 years for BLM to approve some leases that would enable it to advance locally funded parks and trail projects. I just want to ask, where are we on the staff shortage? And is BLM closer to where they should be, which means is it robust enough to translate to fewer delays on the ground?
Thank you, Congresswoman, and we will take that concern back to the office with us when we depart this afternoon. I want you to know that under Tracy's leadership, the BLM has initiated a number of hiring surges and recruitment efforts to fill those vacancies. And we feel like we're continuing to make progress to build back the BLM workforce, including significant hiring increases at the headquarters and across the Bureau, because a lot of the folks don't actually work here in D.C. And we'll tell you that we remain committed to ensuring that we can fill these positions because we know the work is critical.
Yeah, and we'd appreciate if you let us know how Congress can best support you in that effort as well. I have a little more time. Can you tell us what it would do to BLM's ability to continue to advance smart energy development, outdoor recreation, conservation, the full spectrum of uses for BLM lands if Congress were to cut the Bureau's funding by 50%, as a jaw-dropping 144 of my Republican colleagues voted to do in fiscal year 24?
Congresswoman, of course, everything in our budget we feel is justified. As I have said many, many times, our public lands belong to all Americans. I'm proud of the work we've been able to do to lift up our public lands so that the outdoor recreation industry can grow. It can only grow if they have places to go that people want to go. So all of the work we're doing on ecosystem restoration, the Endangered Species Act, all of these things, they help preserve and conserve our public lands in a way that benefits the American people, and I believe will increase opportunities for small businesses and our economy around the country.
Thank you. I yield.
Ladies, time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Minnesota, the chair of the Subcommittee on Energy and Minerals, Mr. Stauber. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Madam Secretary, thanks for joining us today. Yesterday, the House passed the Superior National Forest Restoration Act in a bipartisan fashion. It's a victory for northern Minnesota and the people I represent, along with U.S. mineral security, in the wake of your decision to stop mining in my home state of Minnesota. Yet just a week and a half ago, you did it again. You shut down mining, this time in Alaska, when you selected the no-action alternative for Ambler Road. Earlier in the testimony, you said there is no mine. There's going to be no mine if there's no road access into it. And for the 23 miles of the BLM land of the 211-mile road, you have, in your decision, have stopped that mine once again. What economic price will the people of Alaska have to pay for this decision? And did the department analyze the economic impact of stopping Ambler Road?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. And so, as you know, there was no related mine proposals pending for this area.
Madam Secretary, did you analyze the economic impact to Alaska and the Native Americans?
Congressman, it's my understanding that if we had a mine proposal, then an analysis such as that would be undertaken, but there's no mine proposal, so it's difficult for us to
Madam Secretary, because time's limited, we analyze the economic impact. Stopping Ambler Road stops the 65,000 jobs the project would create. $5 billion, that's what it'd be, $5 billion in wages and $1.3 billion in local and state revenue to the great state of Alaska. Madam Secretary, expert analysis estimates that at least 384 new mines will need to be built over the next decade to meet demand for renewable energy sources. You mentioned earlier that there were 5 critical mineral mines. Were these new mines? Were these new critical mineral mines, or were they expansions or modifications of existing mines?
It's my understanding that the critical mineral mines are new permits, and we'd be happy to impart that information on your staff.
And were they hard rock projects?
Do you know what mines were?
You don't know, do you? Were there any coal projects? You don't know, do you? Madam Secretary.
Congressman, if you would like specifics on all of those mines, as you can imagine,
that's why I asked.
Laura Daniel Davis, our acting
deputy, would
be
continue
happy
in my
to answer.
questioning, Madam Secretary. The Department of the Interior, under your leadership, has squandered every opportunity to provide these minerals domestically. The Duluth Complex, in my district, is the largest untapped copper nickel find in the world, and you shut it down. And as you testified before the Appropriations Committee last year, you didn't even know there were critical minerals in there. You shut it down without having any knowledge that there were critical minerals in there. During your testimony before the Appropriations Committee 2 weeks ago, you stated, quote, "This administration has made a steadfast commitment to strengthen government-to-government relations with tribal nations," end quote. 2 weeks ago, you announced a final rule for the management of the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska, and last September, you canceled previous leases in the 1002 area of ANWR. Both decisions have been slammed by the Alaska delegation along with communities across Alaska, including Alaska Native communities on the North Slope, who claim you have refused to meet with them on both ANWR and NPRA. Madam Secretary, when was the last time you met with Alaska Native communities on the North Slope?
Congressman, thank you for the question. And I did my first trip to Alaska. I went all the way up to Uktiagvik. I had a roundtable with tribal leaders there. I also want to say that with respect
Madam Secretary,
to this area,
I have 47 seconds left. When was the last time that you met with the Alaska Native communities on the North Slope?
I was going to say, in addition to that, I've had many virtual meetings with Alaska Natives since I have been in office. And I also would like to say that, speaking for other tribes, because tribes are not a monolith, there are tribes that rely on a subsistence lifestyle whose lives depend on the caribou migrations and other animals to help their children to live.
Is that why you put the comment period during the whaling season? That's unacceptable. Madam Secretary, just a few short months ago, there was a member of the North Slope that sat here, several members that said you have not met with them. They've requested meetings with you twice. You neglected to speak to the Native American community from the North Slope, and they said that in a hearing, and it's disappointing. In fact, they tried to set up 2 meetings with, their words, radio silence from you, and it's unacceptable, and I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request. A document that I would like to enter into the record by unanimous consent.
I got one too, but I'm going to let you go first.
Oh, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that. Unanimous consent for 100, please, Mr. Chairman. Since it has been suggested erroneously that the Secretary failed to consult with Alaska Natives, I seek unanimous consent to enter into the record a document outlining DOI's extensive engagement and consultation with North Slope local governments, Alaska Native corporations, and tribal entities regarding the NPRA rule.
Without objection.
Thank you.
I also have a unanimous consent request. This is an article from the New York Post titled "City Hall Vows to Probe Lawlessness Following Post Report on Spiking Crime Around Floyd Bennett Field Migrant Shelter." It says, according to NYPD data, theft, robbery, and petty larceny are all increased in the 63rd Precinct, which includes the former federal airfield between November 27th and January 7th, the first several weeks of migrants being housed at the massive tent city. Without objection, So ordered. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, for 5 minutes. You're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. New York Post and the Congressional Record. Can't believe it. I want to return a little bit to one of the question lines that we saw earlier, Madam Secretary, and I want to clarify a few things. You are the Secretary of the Interior, correct? You are not the Secretary of Homeland Security, correct? The jurisdiction for border enforcement largely falls under the Secretary of Homeland's department. Is that correct?
That is my understanding.
And I think it is profoundly unfair of a line of attack to come in for explicitly targeting a secretary whose jurisdiction is legally bound for not being nominated to a different department. And I think it's profoundly important that we have clarity here on the jurisdiction of the Interior. I also find it very odd that there seems to be this push for you to be coordinating with Secretary Mayorkas when the Republican majority has voted to impeach Secretary Mayorkas on no evidence, with no allegation of a specific crime. And yet, if their allegation is that this is a reckless individual, they also seem to be alleging here that you should somehow be responsible for working with that. So that, to me, also I find to make no sense, and also cuts to the core of what this whole immigration thing is about here, which is unfortunately not a solution but politics. And it's about not making sure that we solve this issue, not providing a path to citizenship, not ensuring that we are providing resources to judges to adjudicate these cases, but to continue to restrict the resources and policies necessary so that there continues to be a problem, so that it can continue to run a news cycle. We are better than this. Secretary Haaland, I'm going to say it because I think it's important too. You are the first Native cabinet secretary in the history of the United States. Is that correct?
Yes, Congresswoman.
Let alone the first Indigenous woman to ever serve as a cabinet secretary in the history of the United States from either party. Is that correct?
Yes, Congresswoman.
I find the notion or the suggestion, and it's not just because of your identity, it is because of your record. Your record. The insinuation that you do not care for, or the insinuation that you are not extraordinarily attentive to tribal issues, to be deeply offensive. It is deeply, deeply offensive. And you are not in a position to speak up for yourself because you are an eminent professional, and I'm going to say it. I'm going to say it. Because this woman has served on this dais too, and I had a front row seat to how she advocated for Native communities here in the United States Congress too. And the insinuation that that is somehow not central to her mission here is just completely unsubstantiated. And that's a line that we should not cross. It's just not. Tribal consultation is very important, and it is fraught. Different tribes have different standards for consultation. Is that correct, Secretary Haaland?
Yes, Congresswoman. No tribe is a monolith. Tribes are not. They're in different areas of the country. They're all going to have different experiences and advocate for different things.
And so it is extraordinarily challenging when we have such a great diversity of our tribal communities in this country to meet all these different standards of consultation. But the Department of Interior has taken historic measures to meet everyone where they are at. Is that correct? Is that a fair assessment to make?
Congresswoman, when we first got into office, I'll just point out that we had a consultation on tribal consultations. We got tribes together to ask them, what's the best way for us to meet you where you are? And so we take that information, and it helps us, guide us through how we do consultations for various issues, through the various bureaus and offices, but also in general for Indian country.
Thank you very much, Secretary Haaland. And, while I am sure that there are places where we always can improve, and there are places where we can always make sure that we meet people better, I want us to be very mindful about the individual that we are speaking to here, and to make sure that we're doing that with respect. And with that, I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, the chair of the Subcommittee on Public Lands. Mr. Tiffany, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Secretary, having been sufficiently chastised, I'm going to start here. Roughly 40% of our southern border is federal lands. Is trash on the federal lands along the border an issue?
Congressman, I have not been to the border, so I couldn't tell you that.
How much funding in your department's budget is directed towards trash on federal lands along this southern border? Do you know offhand?
I would be happy to for us to research that and get back with you on
Yeah,
it.
and I don't expect you to know that right offhand, but I can tell you it's zero. It's zero. The Bureau of Land Management shared with us when I was down to the southern border in February, and we looked with all the damage that's being done, fentanyl overdoses, crime that's rampant, that's happening in places around America. There's 193 tons of garbage that was picked up by the Bureau of Land Management in 1 year. You said one of the tasks that Interior, that you all take very importantly, it's one of your priorities, is conserving natural resources. Is dumping 193 tons of garbage on our federal lands conserving our natural resources?
Clearly not.
Representative Stauber, just here to my left, asked you a question in regards to consultation. Why did you not meet with the slopers? Why have you not consulted and coordinated? I understand that you met with them very early on, but since then they've had real concerns with the actions taken by the Biden administration and Interior. Why have you not met with them?
Congressman, I want to assure you that we have had very strong engagement with Alaska Native tribes and the ANCSA corporations and I can just say, starting on March 13th, 2023, the administration previewed its intent to develop this draft rule. On August 25th, in advance of the publication, the BLM mailed a formal offer of consultation to 45 tribes and 30 Alaska Native corporations.
Madam Chair, or Madam Secretary, I'm sorry, if I may interject. Do you know if the North Slope communities prefer the Obama-era integrated activity plan or the Trump-era integrated activity plan? Have they told you the one that you rescinded, the Trump-era one that was also there during the Obama era, have they told you which one they preferred?
Congressman, I do want to say that there are a lot of tribes in the area that you're referring to. So
we heard from them, Madam Secretary. We heard from them in committee here. They prefer the Trump-era plan because they went and consulted with them. Do you know, Madam Secretary, that you could be breaking the law by not following the consultation and coordination requirements that are in place?
Thank you for
Madam
the
Secretary, do you know when they came and testified before us, I believe they refer to themselves as the slopers, they've said since 1980 their life expectancy has went up 13 years. And it's directly a result of finding oil and natural gas up in that area that has benefited their communities. In fact, there was a gentleman that was here. His arm was all bandaged up. He took a harpoon through his hand, and if it wasn't for the clinic that was built, and we heard this directly from him, the clinic that was built as a result of oil revenue, he said he may not be here today. He may have bled to death. Did you know that their life expectancy has went up 13 years since the discovery of oil and gas?
Congressman, I appreciate that information. I want you to know that there are many tribes in Alaska, And we know that they don't all feel the same way about every single project that happens in Alaska. It's our job to hear from everyone. We did extend the public comment periods for this issue, and we understand there has been a request, and my staff is working through the request currently.
Madam Secretary, one of your employees put this quote up here. We got to rush this through. Is rushing and evading the consultation and coordination requirement? I'll close with this question. Will you commit today to delaying the National Petroleum Reserve Alaska regulation so that you can meaningfully engage with North Slope communities, Native villages, Native corporations, and federally recognized tribes? Will you make that commitment to consult with them as is required under the law?
Congressman, I can assure you that we don't generally work to rush anything through. We take everything that we do very seriously, and we follow the process to a T.
Gentleman's time has expired.
I yield to the chairman.
I ask unanimous consent to submit for the record this resolution by the voice of the Arctic Inupiat and signed by the Inupiat community of the Arctic Slope Regional Corporation, and the North Slope Borough opposing the MPRA role, citing the lack of engagement by the department. Without objection. Okay. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Napolitano. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Secretary, welcome again. And first of all, let me state that I associate my remarks with Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. I believe you're doing your best. Madam Secretary, the department is working to implement the funding we secured under the infrastructure law for large-scale water projects, but one investment is frankly not enough. It must be continuous funding to grow, construct, maintain, and operate more facilities. That is why I am proud to have introduced Large-Scale Water Recycling Reauthorization and Investment Act to reauthorize funding for water recycling and reuse projects in the West. It's imperative we work to address the climate change, not to protect our water supplies and increase the presence of regional large-scale water projects for the benefit of the future U.S. climate change. Secretary Haaland, could you speak how the department is prioritizing water recycling under fiscal 25 budget?
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. And again, I want to say how happy we were to be in your district and appreciate you hosting us when we visited there. As you know, last fall we launched a new large-scale water recycling program and made initial funding from Bill available to incentivize projects at a larger scale aimed at creating new water supplies that are less vulnerable to drought and climate change. With respect to funding details, the FY 2025 budget continues to support all of the Water Smart programs, including water recycling for $4 million and desalination for $7 million.
Thank you. I trust others are going to be seeking funding under this program. Another thing I'd like to ask is water recycling and reuse projects are a critical component in water security as we move forward, especially in the Colorado River Basin. The Bureau, basin states, tribes are engaging in ongoing communications and negotiations regarding the post-2026 operations. Until then, we are operating under the 2007 interim guides and the drought contingency plan. Do you explain to the committee how funds for the drought contingency plan are being implemented and how the discussions have been going with tribes in and along the basin? And all tribes have been concluded and active.
I would like to say that the Colorado River Basin, of course, we know that it's crucial to 30 tribal nations there. We're very proud of the work that the Bureau of Reclamation has done to bring people together and to make sure that tribes have a voice in how we move these issues forward. We have fostered an unprecedented level of collaboration and partnership with tribes, as well as the states and Mexico in our efforts to protect the short-term stability of the system and lead efforts to stabilize it into the future. This is the first time, Congresswoman, in history that tribes have been given a meaningful seat at the table. And I really am grateful to my team for making sure that that has happened.
Thank you for doing that. It's important to note that the large-scale water project is something new in the West, and I think many more states may be looking at it for the future protection of drought. And I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, the subcommittee chair of the Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries Subcommittee, Mr. Bentz. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here today. So I'd like to start with the permitting reform, Title III, Section 321, the Builders Act. It was just passed as part of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. And my question, this was drawn up a little less than a year ago, but the purpose is to kind of facilitate and make more projects happen quicker. What has your department done to implement this law? Are you writing rules now to make sure this law is applicable? And if so, where are they?
Thank you, Congressman. If it's okay, I would love to pass this question to our Acting Deputy Secretary, Laura Daniel Davis. She can answer that better than me.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, and thank you for the question, Congressman. And I think one really important matter that we've been working on across government, including with the Department of Energy, and you've probably seen really recently.
Are you writing rules? Are you writing rules?
Can you be specific about which provisions you're referencing?
All of them. We'll just start with the first one, the Builders Act. Are you writing rules? Just say
I'm
yes or no.
going to need a little more information on the specifics. We're writing a lot of rules.
I'm sorry?
We're working on a lot of rules. So I would help specifics. We're working with the Department of Energy on transmission.
Okay, you don't have rules yet. It's been a year. You don't have rules yet to implement a law that would speed your permitting process up. Is that what I'm hearing? You don't have them yet.
Well, our permitting process, we've been working very diligently at ensuring that it is efficient, and that includes what the Secretary was discussing about early engagement with communities and tribes.
I'm not sure the year reflects diligence, but I'm happy to hear you're doing something. Would you please give me copies of whatever it is you're doing within the next 2 weeks? Would you please do that?
Yeah, we'd be happy to respond for the record.
And
thank you.
Thank you so much. The conservation rule, I'm unclear on the conservation rule. We had a hearing yesterday on it. Passed a bill regarding it. The conservation rule, in my opinion, is a direct attack on multiple use of federal lands by making conservation, quote, on par with other uses. Madam Secretary, tell me what on par means in your mind. And to make it more clear, my question is this conservation rule applicable to a specific space of land or across the board to every activity that's occurring under the guise of multiple use on federal land?
Thank you for the question. And you're referring to the BLM public lands rule, is that correct? Conservation, as you know, our public lands have a multi-use purpose mandate. And so we just wanted to make sure that all of the uses that our public lands are for can be worked on par with one another. No purpose is more important than the other. They're all important.
Well, that kind of goes without saying. But my question to you is, there are ambiguous, almost impossible to understand, subjective standards established for what is conservation. So my question to you is, if this is, quote, on par, does that mean that if someone wants to do something, I know mine, does that mean then that it must comply with this new rule?
Are you referring to the restoration and mitigation leases in the rule?
Sure.
Okay. So with respect to the restoration and mitigation leases, those enable development by providing developers an opportunity to offset their impacts through investments in the health of public lands.
Right. So your answer is that when the word on par doesn't mean that it's a separate use. It means it's an across-the-board requirement of anyone who wants to engage in one of the other types of multiple use. That's what you're saying.
I want to say that with respect to this rule, we feel that it will restore balance to our public lands.
Well, that may be your thought, but what you're really saying is it's applicable across the board. It doesn't say that clearly in this rule. I wish it did, so at least people knew what's going on. On the wolf, the gray wolf, we have a bunch of them in my state, and we're going to have a hearing this week. Unfortunately, I don't think you guys are going to be there. U.S. Fish and Wildlife, wish they were, up in Minnesota. My question, I'm happy that the U.S. Fish decided that the wolf was not endangered. I'm very happy with that result. The court came out and suggested otherwise. But do you agree that the wolf is not endangered, as your U.S. Fish and Wildlife subdivision so agreed?
Of course, Congressman, as you know, we follow the science on all of these issues. So I'm not the scientist in the group, but scientists, they do study these things and let us know what the data is. So as I want to say that, yes, the science tells us that wolves are not at risk of extinction in the western U.S. now or the foreseeable future. However, you know that there's a lot of factors that we have to consider in moving forward, and one of those is climate change. To better understand the conservation needs and challenges and inform future policy, the Fish and Wildlife Service is undertaking a process to develop a first-ever nationwide gray wolf recovery plan, also creating a new effort to foster a national dialogue around how communities can live with gray wolves and include conflict prevention, long-term stability, and community security.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Yield back.
The gentleman's time's expired, and I'm going to ask unanimous consent to submit to the record this report from the Congressional Research Service entitled Federal and Indian Lands on the U.S.-Mexico Border that states that DOI manages 607 miles out of 693 miles of federal land on the border. And that's why we held a field hearing down there, and why I would encourage everyone to visit the border that has a relation to this committee. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gallego, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Secretary Haaland. It's good to see you back in the committee room. As you mentioned in your statement, this budget includes resources to keep communities safe, protect our resources, and upholding our federal trust responsibility. One important example is the work to coordinate federal efforts to address missing and murdered Indigenous people. This is something you and I have worked on together since your time in the House through legislation and hearings. It also increases resources for tribal public safety, something I've championed through my bill, the Badges Act. Second, by increasing funding to maintain and expand wildland firefighter pay, the budget prioritizes rapid response to wildfires. I met with firefighters last year to hear about the importance of this pay increase. Our workforce absolutely need and depends on it. Finally, this budget also invests in Western water solutions, especially around drought in the Colorado River system and tribal water rights in Arizona. Water shortages continue to be a top issue in Arizona, and we need investments that meet the moment and secure our access to sustainable growth. To highlight these important investments, I do have a couple questions for you. In Arizona, only 14 of 22 tribes have fully resolved, adjudicated, or partially resolved water rights, with many of the tribes relying heavily on the Colorado River as their primary water supply. I know the Bureau of Reclamation has been engaging in tribal consultation regarding post-2026 Colorado River operations, but I also want to ensure that tribal water rights are protected and tribes with unsettled water rights are not left out of these important decisions that will impact their communities. Secretary Haaland, how is your department working to ensure that the ongoing negotiations over the post-2026 Colorado River operations will protect tribal water needs?
Thank you so much for the question, Congressman. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, of our request for $2.8 billion in permanent funding for the Indian Water Rights Settlement Completion Fund will enable us to make tremendous progress on completing our commitments to complete our ongoing water rights settlements.
Thank you. Sorry, I can't see. Thank you, Secretary Haaland. As you know, recruitment and retention of wildland firefighters has consistently been a challenge. How does the FY25 budget support recruitment and retention of wildland fire personnel?
The department's budget request includes additional funding to hire more wildland firefighters. Our funding request will also help to enhance mental health and well-being services and improve government housing. Those are all important issues. And of course, as we have in the past, we're also continuing to push for the establishment of a special base rate for wildland firefighters and permanent authorization to grant paid rest and recuperation leave. As we can imagine how difficult it must be to be out there on the front line. Our budget request also includes provisions to create a premium pay category tied to incident response and provide waiver authority for a streamlined pay cap.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And when I did meet with the wildland firefighters, it was very clear that they did need this kind of permanent pay, this transparency on where their promotions will be going, payment, as well as to retain them, because many times once they are trained, they will also be recruited by local fire departments that sometimes, many times will pay better, have way better benefits. And just kind of along that thread of line, why is permanent comprehensive pay reform for wildland firefighters a necessary reform?
Yes, of course, as you said it, the demands on wildland firefighter workforce continue to grow as our fires become year-round and not just a fire season, they're fire years. And permanent and comprehensive pay reform will help improve firefighter recruitment and retention, which is the number one thing that we need. It will also lead to stronger workforce capacity in fire operations. I've had opportunities to visit with firefighters across the country. There are heroes of this climate change era, and we feel very committed to ensuring that they are respected in their jobs.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, the chair of the subcommittee on oversight, Mr. Gosar.
Thank you, Ms. Secretary. As the first Indigenous woman to serve in your position, I know that the health and safety of young Native students is a top priority of yours, especially as it is highlighted not only in your testimony today, but also in the DOI budget. That is why I would like to take some time today to bring to light a situation that is taking place at Haskell Indian Nations University in Kansas. For those who do not know, Haskell University is a Bureau of Indian Education school, which ultimately reports to the BIA, and the secretary is their boss. That is why I was disturbed to learn about students making very serious allegations of things like harassment, bullying, theft, sexual assault, fraud, and more for years now. It is my understanding that the BIE investigated some of these claims, and then they went to great lengths to hide them, until recently when media reports made the findings public. For my first question, Secretary Haaland, yes or no, given your very strident and understandable support for the Native community, do you agree that the Bureau of Indian Education and BIA was slow to respond to the concerns of these students?
Congressman, I do want to say that I have visited Haskell Indian Nations University. We care deeply about every single student.
My question is were they slow in reporting this?
I don't have a timeline, Congressman.
Okay. Well, I got so many things to ask you, so I'm just going to leave it at that. Madam Secretary, yes or no, do you believe that the students at Haskell University deserve better than what they've been presented by the BIE? And as the ultimate administrator, you have a role in ensuring that they receive the answers they deserve.
I believe that every single Native child at any of our BIE schools deserves a quality, culturally relative education.
And you accept the role as being the ultimate person overseeing the BIE?
Tony Dearman, the BIE director, is very...
I know, but you're ultimately the boss, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I care about every single student.
I got a number of things. Will you commit to today that you will work to make things better at this school on behalf of the students?
I work every day to make things better for everybody, Congressman, and certainly for our students.
I hear you. Now, let me ask you a question. You know, one of the things I represent is northwestern Arizona. Enrica, are you familiar with the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act?
Yes, I am.
Is there anything you could do in this administration to get that exposure that was limited to southeastern Clark County and northwestern Mojave County? They were excluded by administrative fiat. This is the Wallapai tribe. This is a whole bunch of different individuals that have been excluded for years. Is there anything you could do to help us compensate that with this administration?
Congressman, we'd be very happy to take a look at that. I know that there are a lot of communities in New Mexico as well who have been working to be acknowledged for a very long time. I appreciate knowing that, and we will take a look at it.
Yeah, this was an administrative mistake. Congress wanted to have all of Nevada and Arizona placed in there, and they did not. Somebody made an administrative mistake, okay?
I appreciate your concern for our tribal communities, Congressman.
Number two, I know that we helped settle the Bill Williams water settlement with the Wallapai, but they haven't had any adjudication along those lines. Would you be very receptive to looking at an old infrastructure aspect to form a consortium of water up in northern Arizona? Would you be interested in kind of knowing more about that so that we have a mix of the tribes with local stakeholders like cities and towns to work together to form a co-op that will benefit the whole northern part of Arizona?
We absolutely want to always work together with tribes and local communities, and we will be happy to reach out to the Wallapai on this issue.
Thank you. Now, I assume you agree that transparency in our government is better than secrecy. Would you agree to that?
Transparency?
Yeah, transparency.
Absolutely.
Okay. So is it fair to say that you would consider Citizens United to be wrongly decided?
Citizens United, the Supreme Court case?
Yes.
I don't necessarily have an opinion on that at a budget hearing here.
Okay, so would you consider that all NGOs, that if they take federal money, they should disclose all their supporters?
First of all, I want to say that if we're involved with any meetings, grant requests, anything like that, there is a process that we follow. It's closely monitored by our solicitors department, and we follow all the rules.
But you agree that if they take federal money, they should be able to expose, put out all their donors?
I think people should represent themselves in a correct manner. Okay. Absolutely.
I thank the gentleman. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Chair, I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record. I'm trying to be nice. This memo by Defend Brooks Range that says these deposits do not hold significant quantities of critical minerals. Copper is not a critical mineral. The Ambler Mining District does not contain any economically viable deposits of cobalt.
Mr. Chairman.
Without objection, Mr. Gosar, you're recognized. All right, without objection, so ordered. Anybody else want to submit something to the record?
It's Jeopardy after all. We got a ton of them.
For $200.
Exactly. No.